What do you get when a Ferrari driving guitar shredder teams up with a rainbow vocalist, survives a coma, and tries to bring Baroque music to the Billboard charts? You get Yngwie Malmsteen's Odyssey album, an album that changed metal forever. Welcome back to the Long Live Rock and Roll podcast with myself, Laz Michaelides, and my co-host, Mr. Felipe Amarin. How you doing, bro?
Doing great. Hello, everyone. I hope you guys are doing well.
Good. Now, despite what viewers may think, I didn't choose this album today. What do you mean? A metal album that Laz didn't choose? Yes, Felipe chose this album today, which, guys, it surprised me as much as you. So, we'll let's find out. Felipe, what was the thinking behind it? How come you chose this album?
I just thought, back in the day when I started playing music, every guitarist I know was into Malmsteen, and everyone wanted to be capable of playing at least one bar of one of his songs. And that was the thing, like, if you could play any of his music, that means you're a great guitarist. That was the kind of stuff that people were into.
Right.
And I just think like his music is part of rock history in a way, because he really pushed the boundaries for guitar playing.
Mm-hmm.
And he became just kind of a weird, kind of a creepy character in a way that a lot of people dislike. And it's like Nigel Tufnell in a way.
Brilliant.
If you watch any of his interviews. But the reason why I chose the album was this: his best-selling album is maybe not the album that reflects his music the best. I think he's got proper metal albums that sound more like the stuff that the fans like, but this is the biggest commercial hit. And I think his kind of, again, it's not my cup of tea, this kind of music, but I really admire people who can play to that level. And I think that's the reason why.
Cool. All right, well, let's talk about the album details then before we go into it. So the album was released on the 8th of April, 1988, recorded at a number of studios in the Cherokee in Hollywood, House of Music in West Orange, New Jersey, and Studio D in Austin, Texas. The genre is heavy metal, or more specifically, neoclassical metal. It clocks in at just over 50 minutes long and was released on the Polydor label and produced by Yngwie Malmsteen, Jeff Glickson, and Jim Lewis. You're going to take the us through this episode, but the one thing we didn't put in our little categories when we sent to each other is I completely forgot about his car crash in the coma.
Oh, yeah.
So just a little bit of information on that as a bit of background. So in 1977, he was driving his Jaguar in Los Angeles and crashed it. The accident left him in a coma for nearly a week, where he suffered really bad nerve damage, didn't he? And the doctors thought he would never play guitar again.
Yeah, I think his right arm wasn't working for a few days.
His picking arm, but he went through serious amounts of rehab, and obviously, the determination. I think all you've got to do is listen to this album or listen to anything that he's done and realize that you have to have a certain level of determination to get that good at the guitar in the first place. And did anyone really think he would stop just because he had a car crash? Go through.
Imagine building up to that level again.
Yeah.
As I said, how hard it is to achieve that level of guitar playing from scratch. And imagine you got to a point you can't move your arm and you can't play. You just came out of a coma and you think, what should I do now? I'm going to go back to the same level it was before. That is a hell of an achievement for sure.
And then a bit of a poignant way to end this miserable section is that his mother apparently played him a voicemail from his father who had passed away while he was unconscious. And Yngwie says he remembers it, and he credits that moment with him coming back from his coma, which kind of a bit more on the spiritual side of things. And then Odyssey was his first album post-coma, and I think it kind of reflects a little bit more. So I've read that it reflects a bit more.
I would think that in the 80s that would have been a tape rather than a voicemail.
Yes, possibly. But in the 80s, didn't they record voicemails onto tapes in the phone machine or something?
Like that, yeah.
I don't know. Anyway, you take us through the album. So what are we starting with?
So we're going to start with, let's talk about the band, because you said everything has to be said about the album and how well it did, wasn't it? Mm-hmm. So the musicians in the band. So right me if I'm wrong, but there's two brothers in it, right?
Two brothers.
Well, they have the same surname.
The Johansson.
Yeah. Jens and Anders, they are the keyboard player and the drummer. And Malmsteen plays the bass on kind of half of the album and has Bob Daisley playing in some of the tracks. And we need to talk about Joe Lynn Turner, who is the singer. Thing with this kind of music for me is is mainly about the guitar, and Malmsteen could have could have a whole career playing instrumental music, I would say, like Joe Satriani, like Steve Vai, those guys do.
Yeah,
and he actually played with them on the tour. They did the three of them.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and but I think maybe because he wanted to be more accessible in a way, or maybe because if you just shred the guitar for 2 hours on a gig, people get bored. I don't know why. Or maybe because his actual major influences were guys like Ritchie Blackmore and Jimi Hendrix, people who play in bands with the singer.
Yeah.
So he always had a singer in the band, although there's a few instrumental tracks in the album. So to bring a singer into a band that is led by a guitar player and has the name of the guitar player in it, so it's a tricky thing to do, because like imagine being a singer and not being the frontman.
Yeah,
because that was Joe Lynn Turner's job to make Malmsteen's music sound better, to bring melody to it, to bring lyrics to it, without ever taking the spotlight out of the guitar.
Yeah,
and
to make music accessible, where do you have to come from? You come from a band like Rainbow, who themselves played a big part in heavy metal only 10 years before. Now, it was with a different singer, it was with Ronnie James Dio, but we did the album Rainbow Rising. I think that was episode 76. Where we discussed that actually, and that was a significant album for the same reasons. Ritchie Blackmore taking a lot of neoclassical or classical music phrases and putting them into extended hard rock pieces, and that would sort of form the basis for things like progressive metal to come in the future. But yeah, anyway, so yeah, the nice little comparison there, isn't it, with Ritchie Blackmore and then Joe Lynn Turner coming from Rainbow. But yeah, you're absolutely right. I think, go on.
So, and Joe Lynn Turner sung with Deep Purple after this.
Really?
In 1989. It's the album Slaves and Masters from 1990, I guess. Wow. So I think he toured in 89 with them and recorded Slaves and Masters in 1990. I think it wasn't well received by the fans because everyone, people got used to first Ian Gillan, and then Dave Coverdale and Glenn Hughes.
Too much of a change.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I think, but anyway, So that kind of strengthens that connection between Blackmore and Malmsteen, isn't it?
Exactly, yeah. But I was just going to say, I completely agree with you. Joe Lynn Turner, what he brought was such an important level of accessibility to the album, because he had this melodic sensibility about him, which really kind of, I'd say, almost softened the songs, because if you listen to half of those songs, they are out and out speed, shredding, difficult to play riffs. They're kind of like razor edge metal music, but to have vocals like that sitting over them, it's almost a bit oxymoronic. You have something so chaotic, fast, heavy here, and then his beautiful, simple melodic vocals on the other side, and they work really well. They complement each other, don't they?
Yeah, they do. And I think, again, it makes it a little bit less about the guitar and more about the music.
It could have been overwhelming.
Yeah,
the whole album could have been.
You know what's funny? Because I don't like the guitar shredding thing. So I thought by listening to this album start to finish, I would feel like overwhelmed by the fifth track or something. But actually, it never felt like it was too much in a way.
No.
Because there's some cheesy stuff in there that you think, oh my God, this is too 80s. And the guitar comes in and, okay, that's metal. That's it's a bit different. Right. But the vocals, they really made the album for me.
Yeah.
I think more than anything else, I think Joe Lynn Turner did a phenomenal job in this album. I think, like, to give one example, I think it's track, let me see. It's the second one, Hold On.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the song Hold On. It's a bit like a cheesy love ballad, and the kind of lyrics that they use on that one, my heart cries for you, that kind of stuff. It's not really my kind of music, but the vocal performance is so good.
Yeah,
it's like it makes that song. I think that song could have been an awful track in the album if it wasn't for the vocals. Yeah, the one of the two songs I really didn't like, but actually, in the end, I liked it because of the vocals.
And I agree with you. And I think another two that his performance makes the song far better than it could have been was Crystal Ball and Deja Vu. And two others that I thought really were made perfect for the album with his vocals.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, what a performance, really does tie in and finds that beautiful balance. Because I think you're on the verge musically of it falling only into glam metal.
Yeah.
But because we have that technicality, that shredding, that neoclassical vibe to it,
Yeah.
it really does sort of fall into more of a heavy metal aspect. You know, despite some of the guitar tones and the production, which we're going to talk about later, I would liken this more. We discussed it before. Ozzy Osbourne in the 80s. You've got him on one side of metal, which is actually the heavy metal moniker attached to it. And then you've got glam metal on the other side. They don't sound too different.
No.
But it's about the attitude. And I think Yngwie's attitude here is not about the look, talking about, you know, having sex with your teacher, not this and not that. Like, you know, he's way more on the musicality
stuff.
He's way more pushing towards the musicality side of it.
Yeah, exactly. And again, with a singer like that, you can really sound like a metal band.
Yeah.
You wouldn't do that without a singer who couldn't reach those notes to start with. The vocal range is impressive.
Very good. Yeah. I thought he did great on the album. Yeah.
Yeah, no, all of it. Like everything. He's the one guy that really shines on every track, I'd say.
Yeah.
Really.
Apart from Yngwie. Don't let Yngwie hear you say that.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Cool.
So talking about him, I think the next topic is his influences, isn't it?
Let's do it.
Am I following the script correctly?
You lead it, bro. It's your album.
So there's the inevitable comparison with Richie Blackmore, which I said right at the beginning, but that comes for me because his look is kind of the same.
Mm-hmm.
The hair, the clothes, the guitar.
Yes.
The color of the guitar.
Yeah. And as you think, I was going to say, as when you went from Richie Blackmore's era, which was early 70s, guitar has changed so much, the look of a guitar, the different styles of a guitar. And it shocked me when I sort of started digging into Yngwie to see that he used a Strat.
Yeah.
And then I think, it must be the obvious influence of Richie Blackmore.
Yeah, exactly. And he would kind of sometimes deny influences and stuff, but he always, again, he's a bit of a Spinal Tap character. So he would say, hey, I have no influence from any guitar players. It's just classical music and stuff.
Yeah.
And then, but he shows his admiration for Blackmore more than once in a few interviews. And one interview he did, I think, for the Swedish TV, he said something about like when he was 8 years old, he got the album Fireball by Deep Purple. Yes. And that's what changed his life. So that's the one. So the influence is there. And you kind of never get away from your early influences as a musician. I think every musician can say that. Mm-hmm. If you started like as a heavy metal guitar player, one day you decide to go into jazz music, you still have that metal thing, or even if it's the other way around.
Yeah.
And I think he could never get away from that influence. But the thing is, it looks too similar in a certain way, so that's why people compare. And the style as well, bringing classical music into rock. But I think he's even more technical and faster. That's the thing. That's what is impressive about him. I watched an interview with Richard Blackmore about him, and he was going on about the fact there's a bit creepy to him, that there's all those similarities, right?
Interesting.
But the biggest compliment he gave to Malmsteen was, he's not an idiot. It basically said, when you first see him, you think he's an idiot. It's like it's a bit creepy with all the style and stuff.
Yeah.
But when you hear him playing, he's not an idiot. You can tell that. And one more thing about that is when they met a few times, apparently. The first time they had a beer together, and Malmsteen said he played on Richard Blackmore's guitar, and they talked about music and stuff. The interviewer was like, so how was it for you? Like, because you met your childhood hero, how was it? And he said, no, he behaved more like a fan than I did.
Wow.
Well, you will never know, because both of those characters would claim to be like the best guitarist of all time. And
they both have severe accusations of arrogance, and I think I'll leave that. I find it particularly funny. It is, because you're right. It's very Spinal Tappy. It's like, which obviously one came before the other, but then the other one is saying, actually, no, because I've done it so well, he's my fan, and it really is quite comedic. But they're both, let's say, confident in themselves. They're both arrogance, I've heard, but you know, I think when you have the level of talent that they both have, then maybe he does allow you a certain amount of arrogance.
Yeah, for some people, that's a consequence. There's one more thing I want to say about him
it.
in terms of influences. He also claimed that he never practiced guitar.
Okay, what did he play? What did he learn?
So how can you not practice and get to that level? We know it's impossible, right?
I
so
thought you were there like, yeah, he learned the violin.
No, he said Malmsteen said, I've never practiced guitar. From the first time I picked the instrument, I was performing.
Oh,
so he says his practice sessions were performances. Yeah. And he said, I need to quote him properly. I was expecting to be blown away by what I was doing. So he wanted to be blown away by his own music from the beginning.
I didn't think this episode would go so Spinal Tappy, but it's brilliant.
It's just brilliant, man. I love them, man.
Well, going deeper into the musicality behind these style and influences, what we are talking about very obviously with Yngwie Malmsteen and Ritchie Blackmore is my second favorite genre of music, which is classical music. Now, we call it neoclassicism, which obviously, for those who don't know, means new classicalness. And what was important about this album is how he really framed this neoclassicism in a way to make it accessible. And we already gave a bunch of credit to Joe Lynn Turner for making those songs radio friendly, you know, in terms of, you know, how the anthemic choruses, the sing along melodies, the really nice bridges. But all around that is Yngwie Malmsteen's very serious classical guitar playing. And what we're talking about by classical guitar playing is this. I'm gonna jump into it a little bit in the next section, but you kind of have two avenues to come from in rock metal music. You either have the blues or you have classical music. Now, a large majority of rock and metal came from the blues, but there are certain elements that developed from classical music. If you think about progressive rock bands like Emerson, Lake and Palmer, you know, all of those bands, yes, all hugely classically influenced. Now, because classical music is so difficult and so hard to perform and play and execute, that's why performers like band members of Yes, Emerson, Lake and Palmer, Genesis go down the progressive rock route, because it allows them, doesn't it? It allows them to flourish and show their chops more often. So not often do you have a classically influenced musician go towards rock, because rock is blues-based. It has more improvisational elements. It has more jamming sides as well. You know, it's more about, let's, you know, look at bands like, I know any rock band like AC/DC, whose riffs are kind of blues based around blues chords progressions. You're definitely not hearing classical.
You can even hear some country in AC/DC.
Yes,
you can't hear classical.
No,
at all.
Exactly. So to expand, what I'm saying about this, no, you are right, is that drawing on classical guitar scales, classical music scales, you know, some particular ones that Yngwie uses a lot. If you've got the harmonic minor scale, Phrygian runs. Now, Phrygian is a guitar mode, and we're not going to go too deep into that, but a mode is basically playing a scale, like the major scale. There are 8 notes in the scale, and if you play from the first note, that's one scale. If you play the same scale, but from the second note, that's another scale. From the third, another mode, sorry. The third one, another mode, like on and on and on. And there is a particular violinist called, what's his name? I know his surname is Paganini. I think his first name is Nicholas Paganini. Anyway, yes, Nicholas, no. It is, isn't it? Anyway, the classical composer called Paganini, and he's a shredder on the violin before shredding ever became a thing. And so you can really obviously hear these influences in his songs. I mean, songs like Riot in the Dungeon, if you take away the vocal line, it almost is like a classical piece of music in itself because of how organized and structured it is. This was just a new language of guitar playing, which is why this is such a significant album in heavy metal and rock, I suppose. You know, although Ritchie Blackmore. Now the thing, sorry, I'm getting sidetracked. I get excited when I talk about metal. Well, the thing with Ritchie Blackmore is he was a neoclassical guitarist at heart, but Deep Purple required him to play some of the bluesy elements, which is why Machine Head is such a brilliant album, because you have the bluesy elements in some of the funkier, bluesier songs. You think Smoke on the Water, Maybe I'm a Leo, stuff like that. But then songs like, Lazy is another example. But then songs like Highway Star, where you get those dual call and response things from the guitar and the keyboard, where they're both just sort of playing very organized, structural, scale-based phrases. So yeah, I mean, like I was saying, it wasn't just playing fast. He was introducing classical compositions to his music, and you can hear it throughout the album. I mean, the classical music influence is everywhere. But just check out song, well, which one have I put? Krakatoa, the which is named after the volcano, which I think is a fair name for a song because it's quite a volcanic song, filled with classical licks, scales, lines, dual lead harmonies. And then the funniest part for me is that as soon as Krakatoa finishes, you've got the song Memories, which is literally a Baroque piece of music played on the harpsichord, which is a typical Baroque instrument. So yeah, so that was what I had to say about the neoclassical stuff. As you can tell, I'm very passionate about heavy metal, and not even more so, but almost as passionate about classical music. I think they go hand in hand together.
Well, they
That's
do.
a whole other episode.
Do you know what? Yeah, do you know what I think? There's a common element between classical musicians and heavy metal musicians. It's discipline.
Perfectly said.
You can't play those genres without being really organized with your practice.
Yeah, absolutely.
And like, because you can't fail when you're performing those things.
Yeah.
If you're playing like improvised kind of music, like jazz and blues and classic rock, you can jam, you can improvise, you can sometimes get away with a mistake, and that becomes your mistake becomes an inspiration for yourself to go into a different direction in the song.
Yeah.
But when you're playing classical music and when you're playing heavy metal, there's some phrases that need to be spot on, that need to be performed flawlessly, and I don't think too many musicians can get to that level. So anyone who plays classical music or heavy metal to a high standard is a serious musician, you know.
Yeah, and it's why I also think that you have that a lot of heavy metal bands will play guitar solos note for note how they are on the album, because they were written to fit with the album.
It's a composition, whilst in normal kind of like rock and roll, hard rock, classic rock, the guitar is a solo instrument, but normally it's an instrument that you expect people to be improvising with it, whilst in metal in general, it's everything the guitar plays is part of a composition.
Exactly, yeah.
So that's why sometimes you have the keyboards playing the same thing as the guitar at the same time. So you need to unisons with the guitar. That's not an easy thing to do. You need to be really precise.
So with that in mind, I would just like to go on and talk a little bit about what this did for metal. And there is one subgenre of heavy metal that is quite significantly influenced by this album, and that is what we call power metal or symphonic metal. There's a few little elements that are different within them, but ultimately you can kind of group them as the same thing. Now, before Odyssey, as I said, metal was predominantly blues-based. And what I'm saying by blues-based is not that it followed a blues chord structure, but in terms of scales used, Black Sabbath and Tony Iommi were inundated with scales that were using the pentatonic scale. Now, the pentatonic scale is a major or minor scale, but you remove some notes. Penta means 5. There's only 5 notes in a pentatonic scale. And what it did is it stopped one scale from being a bit too intricate. Okay, 8 notes. Which ones do we choose? Get rid of some of them, and you've got 5 left. And it kind of summarizes it, doesn't it? I think it's the minor pentatonic summarizes the minor scale. So, it doesn't have all the notes, but it's
the best of.
The best of, perfectly put. But yeah, so because
just the hits.
Just the hits, yeah. But then as we sort of established, as metal moved on and evolved, and we kind of moved into thrash, into death metal, we moved away from the blues side, and then looking at people like Yngwie Malmsteen, who took influence from Rainbow and Deep Purple and the neoclassical elements of them, started incorporating this classical stuff more. And this, especially this album, among others, was so influential in Europe in the late 90s and early 2000s. Now, Europe itself, God, man, we could do a whole episode on this. Europe itself, as a background, came from classical music. Britain and America had a blues background, and we know this because blues started in America, and then it came over to England in the late 40s and 50s, and that's when we got the blues boom in the UK. So UK and USA, blues-based. In Europe, classical-based. So when metal started growing in the 70s and 80s, Europeans were thinking, what can we do with this? And then suddenly you have someone like Yngwie Malmsteen turn up and be like, here's how you put your classical influence into heavy metal. And like, oh shit, look at this.
Because that's part of their tradition. It's their cultural background. People grew up listening to classical and learning classical music in music schools or even at normal schools. So yeah.
And so then because of that, you end up having power metal bands like Stratovarius, they're from Finland, I think, Rhapsody of Fire from Italy, Sonata Arctica, I think also from Finland, and Blind Guardian from Germany. One other band I'm going to add in, because they're not from Europe, is Angra from Brazil.
Oh yeah,
led by Kiko Loureiro.
Yes,
who was a huge Malmsteen fan. You've got power metal bands like that, symphonic metal bands like Nightwish, Therion, and Camelot, all taking these elements from Yngwie's stuff, all taking the neoclassical guitar style, fast arpeggios, harmonic minor scales, baroque phrasing, the classical and the metal fusion, classical composition techniques with energy of metal, guitar and keyboard playing each other, call and response, dueling together, playing harmonies on top of each other, the soaring operatic melodic vocals over complex instrumentation, and the melodic metal accessibility, taking technically elite music and making it engaging and accessible. So there you go, and that's what Odyssey did for metal in the world. It basically pioneered power and symphonic metal.
Interesting. Wow, man. Go. That's a really in-depth analysis. I love that.
Yeah, I tried to keep it as short as possible. I'm very passionate, as you guys all know. But
it's really interesting to consider those elements of classical music and when they came from historically, and to see that classical music has survived through other styles. You know,
and you made the best argument, and I completely agree, and could go on forever about why classical music and heavy metal music are the closest genres to each other.
Yeah.
But at the same time, like you said, on the surface, you'd never think you listen to Metallica and be like, oh, well, that what goes hand in hand with, Beethoven.
Just look at the crowds, right? The normal audience for a classical concert and the normal audience for a rock.
Well, if a normal classical concert is suit and tie, then normally a black suit, right? And most metalheads wear black,
Yeah, so basically classical music is heavy metal without the headbanging. So that's
there you go. And with acoustic instruments, I think. But yeah.
It's
Anyway, shall we move on? So your next topic is the 80s sound of production.
Yeah, what I think about this album makes it a bit too cheesy. Some of it is the sound. The snare drum sound is typical 80s with a lot of reverb and sounds a bit artificial in a way. So the whole drum sound is a bit overproduced in a way, and a bit echoey at some points. Everything, vocals and everything, the layers of vocals with the harmonies and stuff. I think the 80s sound of this album is the worst part of it in a way, because 80s production became it really became a thing of the past. You're not going to do that ever again. I don't think people want to go back to that style of recording. Interesting point is Malmsteen was the producer, I think, of all his albums. I think he never allowed anyone else to be in charge. He knew what he wanted. He knew the sound he wanted. But I think in terms of arrangement and what makes it, at some point, it makes it sound a little bit worse than I expected, is the 80s style in songwriting as well. So I'm gonna just check the track list, because there's a couple of songs that I think Hold On, which I mentioned, which is great because of the vocal performance. Now Heaven Tonight is the one song I would totally skip next time I listen to this album. Right? It's the closest they ever got to Bon Jovi, I would say.
That's a great comparison. Yeah, sounds very
because
similar.
There's a breakdown with the vocal harmonies in the middle. It's like You Give Love a Bad Name. It makes me think of that song. So I wouldn't expect to listen to Malmsteen comparing him to Bon Jovi. Sorry for the Malmsteen fans out there, but that song simply doesn't make it to my list of best songs in the album. Anyway, so that's not my favorite in a way. So sounds too 80s. Now, the same thing I can say about Crystal Ball and Now's the Time.
Agreed.
I don't think those songs are as good as the rest of the album, but you have a great sequence of songs starting from Dreaming. So Dreaming, Bite the Bullet, Riot in the Dungeons, and Deja Vu. Those songs are proper metal, in my opinion, and they break away from the 80s vibe. So I think every time it got too cheesy because of lyrics and vocal harmonies and all the 80s things, a guitar solo comes out of nowhere, and then saves the song. That's one thing that must be said about the album. every guitar solo is flawless. Every vocal performance is amazing throughout the whole album. So even the cheesy numbers, they only cheesy because of the mostly because of the love ballad sort of lyrics and an 80s production. But the songwriting is always good. So that's what I would say about it. And the one song that I really, really enjoyed was Dreaming, because it's an acoustic piece, and there's a lot of classical elements throughout the whole song, played by the keyboards and the acoustic guitar. And he does something amazing, going from an acoustic guitar solo into electric guitar solo straight away. Yeah. So it becomes like a power ballad, like a metal ballad, when the electric guitar comes in. You at that point in the song, you're not thinking of electric guitars anymore. You think, oh, that's an acoustic piece, that's how it's going to be. Yeah. And he surprises you with this amazing solo. So I think that song is probably my favorite, followed by the next track, Bite the Bullet, which is an instrumental track. It's a really short, like a 1.5-minute instrumental song, but everyone is shredding all the way through, and it's a beautiful piece for that kind of style. Yeah. Do you have any favorite songs there, man?
Yeah, I do. So I love the first song. I think Rising Force is brilliant. Yeah. Your listeners are not going to be surprised that my favorite ones are the metal ones. Rising Force is brilliant. Bite the Bullet, Riot in the Dungeons, Faster Than the Speed of Light, and Krakatoa. I think those ones are all fantastic, especially Krakatoa. I mean, I'm not one for... I love instrumentals in general, but if it borders on being too wanky, as we said before, then I'm not really interested. But I think, and that, do you know what I'm about to say, I think can be applied to the whole album. I think despite the fact you have what we're going to call a guitar hero on this album, which is full of fast licks, shredding, sweep picking, this, that, the other, I don't ever feel that it goes into the wanky side of it. No. I feel like the line is towed fantastically. And maybe some of that is because half the attention's on Joe Lynn Turner, and then suddenly you're like, oh, what a lovely, well-sung chorus. And then suddenly you're thrown into a guitar solo. And because the guitar solos are always so short and sweet, I mean, I'm not talking short as in only 10 seconds long, but, he never dwells on it for too long. But when he does give his guitar stuff, like Bite the Bullet and Krakatoa, you've got other instruments doing things as well. I think in Bite the Bullet, there's a little bass solo towards the end. And in Krakatoa, the bass definitely has its moments as well. And although it might be him playing it, it's like at least he's differentiating.
I don't think it's him on that one.
No. Well, the instruments are differentiating. So yeah, no, those are my favorites. In terms of what you were saying, my points about 80s, the sound and production, I agree with everything you're saying. I think half of them, they're like arena rock anthems, aren't they?
Yeah.
It's what you kind of expect, like Bon Jovi or Aerosmith to hear, play in their stadium-filled gigs. I agree with you. Heaven Tonight, Now Is the Time, Hold On. These ones are essentially like arena rock anthems. Very cheesy, very production. The snare drum, very obviously. But I actually think I read somewhere that the label wanted him to break into the US mainstream. And I just think this is a really interesting way of doing it, because I feel like he has maintained his artistic integrity. I don't feel like he has sold out. I don't think that at all.
There's the instrumental tracks are there to prove your point, I think.
Yes, but even if
you want to make an album that's entirely designed to be a commercial hit, you won't have any instrumental tracks in it.
Yeah, that's a good point. But I still think even songs like the ones you said that are pretty cheesy, I still think in that song, even he listened to it and was like, it needs a shredding solo right now, just to bring it back to me, my way.
Yeah.
But yeah, anyway, what a great album. Should we move on to the final part of the episode?
Yes.
Cool. So, Guitar Heroes. There we go. Yngwie Malmsteen and Guitar Heroes. 2 words or 2 phrases that you hear together quite often. Do you want to kick us off? What do you think about this?
What I would say is, if I had to put a title on this section of the show, I would say, Guitar Heroes, do we need them?
Okay, I will do that.
Do we really need them?
I will call this chapter Guitar Heroes, Do We Need Them? What do you think?
I think there was a point in time where, well, especially in the 80s, with this sort of music, the guitar became the main voice in rock music, and it was maybe a bit too over the top. Although Malmsteen turns that into an art form, I don't think everyone was that good. So I think the Guitar Hero thing kind of disappeared in recent times. Maybe Slash was the last true Guitar Hero, because it was like as famous as the lead singer in the band. And you could, but music became maybe more about composition and vocals and the whole band performance than the guitar. So in a certain way, rock music doesn't need guitar heroes, but I think they bring the extra spice to it, isn't it?
I think that we live now in a world full of guitar heroes because we have things like YouTube, where everyone who can shred as good as Yngwie can just upload it to a channel, and then you have thousands, millions of people following you to see how well you can do. The one caveat I will give that is that what we call the bedroom players, as good as they may be, we're not watching them perform night after night.
Yeah.
We're not watching them write their own music and compose their own music. We're not anymore watching them pioneer new styles.
Yeah.
And we're not seeing them act like the rock star that Yngwie acted like.
Well, exactly.
Wearing his capes, driving his Ferraris, like he really was what you would sort of summarize as a guitar shredding god. He came with the flamboyance, with the arrogance. He's the epitome. If you said to someone, describe what you think one of the best guitar players in the world looks like, they might give you the image of Yngwie: long hair, shades on, driving a cool sports car. He really just does epitomize that to the non-music fan.
I mean, coming out of a coma after crashing your Ferrari is a really, really rock and roll thing, isn't it?
That is pretty rock and roll. I think.
Yeah, that's on the top of the list. Yeah, and recovering from that coma and releasing a best-selling album, that's even more rock and roll.
Yeah,
and shredding throughout the whole album, that's even more rock and roll. But I think the Guitar Hero thing, as I said, nowadays we have two things that we didn't have back in the 80s. Is everyone's got access to information. So if you want to learn music, the information is out there. And the other thing is everyone's got a phone with a camera. So you're going to see hundreds of thousands of guitar players who can play difficult stuff, who can play to a level that most people would never be able to play.
Yeah.
But as you said, how many of them are actually creating something? How many of them are serving music in a way?
Yeah.
So the thing is, as an artist, you should put art before you, in a way. And I think even people with a massive ego like Malmsteen, they know that. They know that nothing that they do is bigger than the music, is bigger than the song. So if you don't write good songs, doesn't matter how well you can play the guitar.
Great point.
So I think the songs are great, and you can check that out by just listening to the riffs. If you skip every single solo in this album, that's my claim for this album. If you skip every single solo, it's still a great album.
Great point. I think
the riffs are really good.
I think we do need guitar heroes. And the reason is, maybe not so much these days, but back in the day, in the 70s and 80s, when Jimmy Page, Slash, Satriani, Malmsteen, Blackmore were all doing their thing, I think it really showed that, look at the 60s, okay? You had the Beatles, the Stones, the Who, the Kinks doing their thing. Virtuosity,
but no guitar heroes, right?
Virtuosity didn't shine through as much.
Yeah.
John and George could have been great guitar players, but the music didn't call for it. Yeah. The virtuosity shined through in things like jazz and classical music. Yeah. And jazz were not the forefront of people's listening habits in the 50s and 60s, because there's not popular music. Then you have bands like Guns N' Roses, Deep Purple, Led Zeppelin coming out who were more accessible than jazz, showing people, my God, did you know that a guitar can make this sound? Because all you've been listening to is kind of like, da, 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 da. That's what people thought of when they heard the guitar in the 60s. Now you've got this. Now you've got the whole lot of love solo. This is what can be done. And as each new guitar hero came and went, there was like a new standard, a new level set up of what could be achieved on this instrument. So
it does help to keep the genre alive, isn't it? It's one
genres.
Of the things that,
genres, metal, rock. There's so much, so many of them.
When I think about rock music, is rock music always allowed itself to change, and bands, really good bands, would record albums that are completely different from what made them famous. And I think the guitar heroes, they bring this extra it's extra flavor to the music. You might like the solos more than you like the song. You might not care about the solo at all, but it does help the style to survive, and actually it starts conversations like the ones we're having now, so that's just debating if this is cool or not, or if we need more of that or not.
Right, perfect, cool. All right, then shall we finish off?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, right. You've got your monologue to do. So yeah.
Yeah.
Wicked. Do you want to crack on with it?
Yes, let's do my monologue. A sip of coffee before that. I'm not sponsored by any coffee brand, so just send me a message if you want to sponsor me.
Wet the whistle, so to speak.
Exactly. Right, here we go. With Odyssey, Malmsteen has achieved the biggest commercial success of his career. Some might say that he betrayed heavy metal to embrace the worst side of the 80s, with cheesy love lyrics and vocal harmonies. But don't be fooled by the pop vibes of Heaven Tonight. The instrumental Bite the Bullet and the excellent acoustic and electric guitar solos from Dreaming show why Malmsteen is a mandatory name in any conversation about guitar heroes. The high quality of Joe Lynn Turner's vocals grabs the attention of the listener, making this album less of a guitar solo showcase and more of a collection of well-written melodies and energetic band performance. Maybe we won't see this kind of music being produced in the foreseeable future. Maybe it's a thing of the past. But we should be glad that musicians like the ones in this album have pushed the boundaries of their instruments to blow the minds of their listeners and open new avenues in rock music.
Perfect, man. Really nicely said. Yeah, nicely said. Perfect. Couldn't have said it better myself. Excellent. Cool. Should we wrap it up? Anything else you want to say?
I just want to thank everyone for listening to us again.
There we go. Well, as Felipe already said, thank you for joining us on this episode. Some terms and conditions that we'd ask of you. If you're listening to us on Amazon, Spotify or Apple, please do us a favour and scroll down and give us a little review. Hit the 5 stars, write a little sentence about us, and it does the world of good for us because it takes us up the charts and we're seen by more people. So it's about 20 seconds of your time, but does so much for us. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure to like and subscribe to stay up with our new content.
Thanks for being with us once again. Keep on rocking, everyone, and don't do anything I wouldn't do.
And as usual, guys, take care and long live rock and roll.